Today on Unhooked, we are talking with Shane Melaugh, a good friend of mine and a very inspiring man, the founder of QuitByHealing, and we're going to be diving deeply into his story of recovery and transformation. So this is definitely one you don't want to miss.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipkowitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. In today's episode, we are joined by a remarkable guest, Shane Melaugh. This is a man who struggled with porn addiction in the past, and his journey towards recovery led him down a path of self-discovery and personal transformation. And through that journey, he has now dedicated himself to helping others overcome this addiction so that they can live free from shame and free from guilt. He founded the organization called QuitByHealing, which provides men with a unique approach to tackling this issue of porn addiction head on so that people can turn it into an opportunity for growth and development. So join us today on this episode as we dive into Shane's inspiring story and we learn how his experience can help others on their own journey towards recovery and transformation. So let's dive in. So welcome everyone to this conversation that I'm having with Shane, my first guest on the Unhooked podcast.
It's an honor.
Yeah. And I couldn't be more excited because I'm talking to someone else who seems to be very similar to myself in terms of what we're doing with our life right now and maybe some of the background stories. So we're going to dive into some of that. So first of all, maybe just introduce yourself to my audience and let people know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Shane, and I have, the reason I'm here is because I relatively recently started working with men specifically on porn addiction. And I had a long and winding path to that. So I come from a completely different background because for a long time I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, and I was doing software products, and I was like the marketing guy. And that was kind of my thing for a long time. But I've had this meandering journey, which is, if we go back even further, if we go back to my teens, my obsession was martial arts. And part of it was the appeal of just, the activity itself and learning how to fight, learning self-defense. I was very interested in that. I was always very drawn, even, as a young boy, I was very drawn to everything with like knights and warriors and stuff, right? And but a big part of it for me was also the spiritual aspect and the self-development aspect of it. Like somehow through stories and things that I was exposed to as a kid, I clocked on to this idea that there is something about the pursuit of martial arts that kind of almost forces you to dive into some self-development stuff. Because in learning how to fight and learning how to defend yourself, you're confronted with all kinds of things such as fear, right? Because it's a scary situation to be in. Any kind of fighting situation is a scary situation to be in. So you're confronted with that psychological aspect. You're also at some point confronted with like just the morality and the ethics of it. If I gain the skill to severely injure someone or kill someone, what do I do with that? If some drunk person in a bar actually attacks me, what do I do if I have this level of skill, right? So basically, the more you pursue this, the more there is to it that is beyond just how do you punch, how do you kick, that kind of stuff, right? One of the big influences in my life, I would say, was Miyamoto Musashi and the Book of Five Rings, which is maybe a very clear example of someone who's an amazing martial artist, right? Perhaps the best swordsman to ever live, who writes this philosophical work that somehow all it starts with how do I fight with a sword really well, but it ends up being this whole life path. All that is to say that from a very young age, I was fascinated with this whole thing about like self-mastery, self-development, how to live, essentially. And that kind of mixed in with martial arts. And then I kind of left that path because I needed to make money. And I went down this I learned about marketing and all this kind of stuff, became an entrepreneur, and then later found my way back. So the interest in self-development and also in martial arts never left me. I always wanted to do more about this. And I even found that even working with entrepreneurs, for example, I found that a lot of times it's like, oh, the problems you guys have are actually more about self-development and more about behavior change than about
business
stuff. Because actually you can just Google almost any question, how do I do Facebook ads? How do I build a business? Whatever. You can find the answer to everything. So it's not an information problem. It is something else. And there's all kinds of stuff. It's like perfectionism. It's overcoming your fears. It's a lot of this kind of very personal development-y stuff is really what's standing in the way.
The self-sabotage that comes.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So in a way, even through my entrepreneurship, my path started bending back towards the self-development thing, And I then noticed also that I really preferred that. I really liked doing this kind of work with people. And then I kind of just kept following that path, and I started, I created a productivity course, which also like goes a lot into not just the technicalities, how to make a to-do list or something. It's about how do you actually manage yourself? How do you actually build habits that make you productive? How do you overcome your perfectionism? This is probably the biggest obstacle to productivity that most people have. So it went in this direction. And then at some point I started doing work with men specifically. And through that, I realized that porn addiction was this huge issue in so many men's lives. And it was interesting to me because I had also, like unfortunately, this is basically the normal story. I had discovered porn when I was pretty young, when I was about 13 or so. And yeah, I was an addict. I didn't think of myself as an addict, but I was addicted to porn. I was watching porn almost daily and doing too much of it, for a long time, for a very long time. But I also found a way to overcome that. And I kind of had this moment of clarity where it's like, oh, here's what seems like a really strong overlap between my skill set and a need that people have, a problem I can help people solve, which is why I started making some content that's very specifically about that.
Yeah. So I'd love to kind of take people on a journey. So I want to get into what you're doing now, but I want to start with what got you into it. And I'm just curious, because this is something that's, I think, very fascinating for a lot of the people who listen to this podcast, was there a moment in your life where you realized that porn was a problem? Because I think for so many young men, it's just this thing that we kind of start at such a young age. It's hard. At some point, usually there's something that comes up, and I'm just curious what that was for you.
The thing that really convinced me ultimately was like learning the science about it, where it was like, oh, okay, this is really a problem, like from the perspective of what happens in your brain and this kind of stuff. That was really what won me over fully. But even before that, I did notice that this wasn't good for me, right? But here's the thing, right? For me, the pain point, the main pain point with or around pornography was always rooted in like sexual shame. And I think this is also why I have a little bit of a different approach on the whole thing, maybe, because what was clear to me very early on in my life is that I had a problem here when it comes to sexual shame and my self-image and so on when it comes to sex and relationships. Because first of all, my early experiences, so I had the misfortune of getting interested in girls at a very young age. And they were not interested in me. And by age 10, I was already like the heartbroken guy, And also the problem was that I was the kind of guy who was unattractive. I was unpopular. I was one of the unpopular, uncool kids in school. And, I was, I don't know, pale, blonde, pimple-faced, kind of. I didn't I wasn't one of
A little
those.
socially awkward, bit of an outsider.
Exactly. Yeah. So I wasn't set up for success with this, right? which I think is, look, for a lot of guys, this is pretty normal, because the time when you get interested in the opposite sex is also the time when you're generally least attractive. Right? It's like you're going through puberty, you're weirdly proportioned, your voice is breaking. It's like you're never less attractive than this.
And you're just figuring out a changing social landscape that nobody could figure out anyways.
Yeah. So it's really brutal. It's really brutal for young guys. And I had that too. So I was really not set up to have success with this. But so I had this repeated experience of, I have a crush on this girl, but she doesn't like me back. And yeah, by the time I was a teenager, this was a pattern that I was just stuck in, right? Nobody likes me. I'm not attractive. I can never get a girlfriend, etc., etc. Yeah, and then by the time I actually had, by the time I had sex for the first time, or by the time I got a girlfriend finally, this was already like a deeply ingrained problem. And it wasn't, I think at that point, it wasn't caused by porn. Okay, even though I was already watching porn at that time, I wasn't in a situation that I know is pretty common nowadays, for example, where, you have sex for the first time and you can't get hard. Because you've watched so much porn, you've trained your brain to be attracted to stuff on a screen, and now you're with a real person and it doesn't work, right? That's a wake-up moment for a lot of guys. For me, that wasn't the case. So at the time when I had sex in real life for the first time, I don't think that porn had damaged me to that extent. I hadn't used it that much yet that this was a problem. But the whole sexual shame, the whole lack of my poor self-image and so on. And sometimes I'm also like, I actually don't know where all of this negativity came from. What I remember is that I was unable to relax. I was unable to really enjoy sex. I remember that I felt terrible afterwards. And it brought out a whole lot of emotional baggage. Very unpleasant. And here's the thing, for me, porn was a coping mechanism, right? Porn was the alternative to this, because essentially it was like, okay, it took this long to get to the point where even I get, I'm finally in a situation where a woman wants to have sex with me, right? But now it brings up all this pain, Now I can't even enjoy it. Like, this is what I've been wanting and craving for so long, and I can't even enjoy it. And so obviously this is essentially life inviting you to wrestle with your demons, right? But at the time I didn't see it like that. And I was just like, well, this is terrible. This is terrible. What do I do about this? And in a way, porn is the sanctuary, Porn is safe compared to real sex, because porn will never reject you. With porn, you don't have performance anxiety. With porn, you don't have any of these problems.
Yeah, there's no rejection, there's no fear of anything happening, and you're in complete control.
Yeah. And so that's basically the situation I was in, I think. And I think I started watching porn more and needing porn more after I discovered all the problems I had with real life sexual interaction.
Because it was your escape mechanism.
Exactly.
It was your way to self-medicate away from the pain that was coming up.
Yeah, exactly. So this is how I see it. This is how my story unfolded. Is like there's all this like sexual shame, all this emotional baggage around sex, which I couldn't deal with, and that led me to use porn more. And then you use porn more and it causes more problems, right? So it's like a self-reinforcing, it's a vicious cycle.
And you mentioned kind of the turning point was when you started to learn about the science behind it. And what was that like? Where did you start learning about it? What made you discover that?
Yeah, I basically came across this kind of stuff because I've always been reading about this kind of stuff. I've always been interested in psychology. And yeah, at some point, kind of the pieces just fell together. It's like, okay, porn is doing essentially the same. It's like an addiction, right? The brain of a porn addict is essentially the same as the brain of a cocaine addict, right? Yeah, so that kind of fell in place. But the interesting thing is also, like, at that point, I had already done all the work that I needed in order to quit porn. So once I decided, this is actually bad for me, and I just quit. That was it. That was the end of it. And that was only possible because I had already spent many, many years dealing with this sexual shame, and like diving into that, right? And actually working on those underlying issues and getting to the point where I had, overcome a lot of this pain, right? And so essentially I healed the underlying issues first. And that's why my experience was the moment I decided, I'm not going to watch porn anymore, that was it. It was just over, right? Yeah. This is where my approach is a little bit different, I think, from what you usually find, because this gave me the experience of, if you actually fully heal the problems that made you an addict in the first place, you can just let go. And on the other hand, I think that if you don't heal those underlying issues, you can force yourself to not watch porn, but you're just constantly going to be struggling.
Right. And it'll just crop up somewhere else. Yeah.
Exactly. So to me, that's also where I try to lead the guys I work with, is to say, listen, I don't want you to be in a situation where you're just white knuckle coping with staying away from porn, right? I want you to go on that journey of discovering what is it? What is the pain that I am coping with through this addiction, right? Let's deal with that. Let's get to the bottom of that. And often this has to do with your level of self-acceptance and self-love. It has to do with how you feel about your sexuality, how you relate to the opposite sex or to the same sex if you're gay, and actually dealing with that. And I believe that the more deeply you resolve that, the easier it will be to quit and not feel like it's a big deal.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Gabor Mate?
Yes, I really like his work.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really like about his approach is very similar to what you're talking about. Is he says, the addiction is never the problem. The addiction is the attempt to solve the problem, which is always the underlying pain or loneliness or shame. And the addiction is kind of the response strategy that we use to medicate ourselves. But if you don't go to the actual underlying thing that caused the addiction in the first place, you're not going to get anywhere.
And this is also something that I feel fortunate that I kind of discovered through my own. Like I said, my approach was not to try and quit porn because my pain was the sexual shame. So my approach was always trying to solve that, right? Yeah. And one of the things I noticed that, for example, with relationships, if I got in a relationship, what would usually happen is that if I'm in a good relationship and I have a good sex life, I completely lose interest in porn, right? Mm-hmm. Without trying. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm not going, I have to not watch porn today. Like, why would I watch porn? I'm having sex and it's great, Yeah. But then it was always a telltale sign. It's like something starts going wrong in the relationship, or there's some tension, or there's some, communication breaks down. And there I am watching porn again, which also is I've read about this, is a very common pattern where, something goes wrong in the relationship. The guy starts watching porn, again, to essentially deal with the pain from the relationship. But the watching porn makes some aspects of the relationship worse.
Which then he needs more porn to watch.
Exactly.
So it's another vicious cycle.
Exactly. Vicious cycle until the relationship falls apart. Now you have even more pain that you want to cover with even more porn, right? Yeah. I experienced that very directly in my own life. I noticed this pattern. It's like, why am I watching porn again, right? What's going on? Mm. And I also, I want to invite people to think about, because a lot of guys discover porn very young. And so they build a habit of watching porn. And maybe you're thinking, well, no, I just got addicted to this thing. I formed the habit at an early age. And so the habit is the problem. But I want to invite you to think about this. Like, imagine a world in which you had a bit of a different experience. Like, imagine a world in which you were, first of all, never shamed for your sexuality or your sexual desires, right? You were never like finger wagged or like all men are pigs or any, this kind of stuff, right? Imagine a world where you have some kind of guidance, maybe you have older brothers or uncles or something who kind of take you under the wing, kind of show you the ropes, it's like, hey, here's how this works, this whole thing with, dating and relationships and sex, just kind of give you some support, To
normalize what you're going through also.
Yeah, exactly. Someone you can talk to, right? Someone who can maybe say, hey, look, I'm going to show you how to approach a girl. Imagine also a world where, you don't get shamed or belittled or called a creep or something when you go up to a girl and express, hey, I like you, I want to go out with you or something, right? Where if she rejects you, she rejects you kindly.
Right, and you just kind of say, oh, okay.
Exactly, and it's not like, oh my God, can you believe it? It's so creepy, it's so gross, right? None of that, right? If you had grown up like that, And first of all, you would probably have had a relatively pain-free experience with like dating, and you'd have a girlfriend or something, right? How interested do you think you'd be in porn, right? In that world that I've just described, if porn still existed, do you think you'd be spending 2 hours a day jerking it to porn? Probably not, right? But the truth is that most of us kind of grew up in the opposite world of what I just described, which is like you have no help, you have no guidance, you have no one to talk to, you get shamed all the time. And then, of course you need, of course you're in pain, and of course you need to cope somehow.
Yeah. It's an escape mechanism for whatever pain is there. Yeah. It's interesting that shame comes up so often as one of the factors leading into addiction, and particularly sexual shame. And I'm just curious, you mentioned that you had already done the work healing your sexual shame before you even realized porn was something that you wanted to get rid of in your life. What did you do to actually deal with the sexual shame? Like, what was it that helped you get over that?
So the biggest thing that helped me, and that I would also recommend, is writing. So I actually don't even know how exactly I came across this, but I know that very early on, as I was exploring self-development, I somehow got into writing, and I started developing writing as a habit, and experimenting a lot with different forms of writing. And I noticed that it was really helpful for me to use writing to both explore and process things that were going on inside me. So, one of the things I realized at some point is that I have like a total lack of self-acceptance and self-love. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I had this thing that I know that a lot of people have, where you treat yourself differently than you treat anyone else in the world.
The inner critic.
Exactly. Yeah. Where it's, for something, I don't know, you make some mistake. You make some mistake where if anyone else made that mistake, you'd be like, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Or especially if a friend made that, you'd be like, hey, no problem. You'll do better next time.
Exactly. But because you made the mistake, you're like, I'm such a loser, I'm the worst. I don't deserve anything, right? It's like, why are you being so abusive to yourself? It's insane, right? Yeah. And for me, using writing was a great way to like untangle that knot. Because first of all, even just thinking about that, okay, today I felt really terrible, what happened? And you just write down, you put it in writing, it's like, okay, this happened, I made this mistake, I felt terrible about it. Here's my inner monologue about this. And you write it out and you look and it's like, wow, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. So you started to see the inner workings of your mind.
And also realizing that I was making myself the sole exception in the world. I'm the only one who deserves this treatment for this mistake. And listen, I'm just not that special. All right. That's, for me, that was something that through writing I got to that point where it's like, listen, this doesn't make any sense.
I think for me that's one of the key missing links that a lot of people struggle with is, and it's interesting because this ties into something that I'm very fond of, which is self-compassion. And one of the leading researchers in self-compassion, Dr. Kristen Neff, one of the components of it is this thing called common humanity, which is that realization that you're not alone in whatever you're going through. And I think with porn addiction, and particularly with sexual shame, one of the traits of it is that you feel like you are the only one who is perverted in this way. Like, I am such a pervert, and I am broken, and everyone else is normal. Everyone else, doesn't have these dirty thoughts, or, And so I'm curious, was there something besides the writing that made you realize, oh, I'm not alone in this? Or was it just the writing and then kind of common sense?
No, it was definitely also that. And this is where I think like the internet and internet forums and things can be very helpful, right? Because also exploring this and reading about it and realizing, oh, there's a lot of people have these same thoughts, have these same struggles and so on. That was very helpful. And that kind of then also infuses into the writing. So as I'm writing about this, I realize, okay, I'm actually not the only one. But even that, repeating that to yourself in writing can really make it sink deeper than if you just read about it and think it. So writing is like a way to process what you learn and process the feelings that come up with it in a deeper way. Basically and this took a long time, over the course of years for me, exploring this kind of topic, exploring the things that made me feel bad, questioning my own thought process, and essentially it's also almost like using writing to slowly nudge the way I think and the way I see and it doesn't happen immediately, right?
To kind of rewire, reprogram the mind in a healthier direction.
Yeah, exactly. That was a really, really important thing for me. And let's say that the short form instructions for how to do this is to write. And as a starting point, you can always use something that is like emotionally painful, something that is bothering you. Like you start there. You say, I feel really bad because X, Y, Z. And you basically start exploring that in writing. Like, why do I feel like this? And certain prompts can be very useful, like what you mentioned. Like, if this was a friend, if I was describing a friend, how would I feel about it?
Yeah, how would I talk to this person if this was a friend going through this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this, over time, I just noticed, changed how I thought. It changed my own perception of myself, where really what initially happens is that, that old self-abusive voice still comes up, but you can't take it seriously anymore. Whereas before you're just like, yes, I definitely deserve all this punishment. Now you're like, no, I've actually thought about this very carefully, and this makes no sense. And then over time, that voice basically quiets down, or that's what happened to me, where I'm no longer identified with that voice, essentially. And this is also something that I think is a great exercise for generating a certain kind of awareness, because I think one of the problems we tend to have is that we're overly identified with the thoughts that bubble up in our mind. And I invite people to think about it as, imagine that your weird uncle walks into the room and says this, like blurts this out, right? How would you treat that? If it wasn't in your, because look, it's kind of arbitrary that it's in your head. And you always think that, well, it's in my head, therefore like it must be true, or it must be me. But the truth is, your mind just produces thoughts. Some of those thoughts are pretty silly, right? Yeah. And sometimes it is much more like your weird uncle is like, oh, by the way, blah, 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 blah. And you just go, okay, whatever.
So I'm curious, because it sounds like you are a very introspective, self-aware person. And
I've become that through the writing.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think most people aren't even aware that they're having thoughts. You ask a fish, how's the water? And they're like, what water? Yeah. You ask a random person on the street, what's your inner dialogue like, or what kind of self-talk you're having? They're like, what are you talking about? They don't realize that they're actually having these thoughts about themselves and treating them in a particular way. And so I'm curious, what would you say to someone who doesn't even realize that there's like this, weird uncle coming in, but they're just believing the thoughts almost as if the thoughts are reality?
That's challenging, right? That's what I think of as being fully identified with your thoughts and feelings. Right. And that's a tricky situation.
Because there's no awareness there to even see that you're identifying with it. You just are identifying.
So how do you develop awareness? So I'll give you the boring answer first, and then I'll give you some more interesting answers. Right? The boring answer is practice mindfulness meditation. Yeah. And it's true. Like, listen, if you take up a meditation practice, eventually you get that.
That's my story. That's what got me to this place. So.
Yeah. And listen, it is absolutely true. Like, I have an experience with this as well, where I was struggling with really severe depression at one point. And one of the things I was trying to do to cope with this was I'm just going to meditate more, because I'd read so much about how it helps. Yeah. I kind of barely believed that it would do anything, but I was just so desperate. I'm just going to do this now. I'm just going to meditate a lot and hope that something happens. And something did happen. And I think of it as like a tiny little gap opened up in my mind, a tiny gap between the thoughts and me.
And you identifying with it.
Yeah. And that saved me. That saved me, okay?
Where there was just one crack in the vase where you're like, oh, these are two separate things.
Exactly.
Have you heard the Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response?
No.
It's one of my favorite quotes. So he says, Viktor Frankl?
Yes.
Holocaust survivor, psychologist, wrote these amazing books. And his quote, he says this, he says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. Yeah. And it's so fascinating, because for most people, between stimulus and response, there isn't any space, and they're just reacting and identifying with what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
But all these techniques, mindfulness, self-awareness, journaling, they actually give you access to that space, which is so powerful.
Yeah. So absolutely, and it does work, right? But I call it the boring answer, because basically nobody wants to hear that. You've
nobody wants to. Yeah. They want the silver bullet or the
So
pill.
let me give you two silver bullets, right? The first one is this. You do, and you can do that, like most listening to this, you could do this right now. You could do it right now. And in a way, what I'm suggesting is so easy and so simple. What you do is you go into a quiet room, you shut down all distractions, you sit in a comfortable chair, and you do a 1 hour unguided meditation. You just close your eyes and you just wait for an hour. Basically, you put a 1 hour timer on your phone, right? And you put it into silent, no distract mode. You place it out of arm's reach from you. You sit down, you close your eyes, and you just do nothing until that bloody timer goes off. And you will experience the fact that your mind produces thoughts and that your body produces emotions during that hour. Guaranteed. Yeah. And also, you will sit there, and I have done this, just for the record, right? I've done this several times. You will sit there and you will be convinced that you didn't set the timer right.
Right. Yeah. You're like, clearly the phone is broken. Yes. It's been 3 hours. Exactly. And then when you look at it, it's been like 12 minutes.
But you're not allowed to look at it. but anyway, this is, but honestly, a lot of people won't do this because it seems too hardcore, but it's so accessible. And when I say an undirected meditation is like, you're not focusing on your breath, you're not doing a mantra.
You're just sitting there.
You're just sitting there. Yeah. And all you do is you sit there and you watch what happens. And there's no further instructions. Now, like I said, over the course of an hour, I think even someone who is fully identified with their mind will realize that something's going on here. Because there's this battle of the part of you that said, I'm going to do this for an hour. And all the other parts of you that are like, I want to get up right now. And this is dumb. And why am I doing this thing?
The self-doubt, the criticism, the judgments, And
an hour is long enough, I think, for that you'll see that some really interesting stuff starts happening. So that, I think, and maybe after that you can do more of a 10 minutes a day type practice. But I think if you really just want to, if you want to kickstart this, that's one way to do it.
Well, I think most people would probably agree with you conceptually. And they would say, I understand that, I have these thoughts and sometimes they're fiction. But again, when we're talking about addiction and compulsive behaviors, it almost doesn't matter whether or not somebody believes in it theoretically or in principle. It's whether or not there's that awareness in the moment when they're reaching for the laptop or the phone or the drug or the alcohol. And I'm curious, how is it that you cultivated so much awareness in your day-to-day life, in your moment-to-moment? Is it the martial arts that played a role in that, or?
I think it's all of it. I think it's all of it. So because I also have, had various meditation practices over the years. I have had periods, I'm not a lifelong meditator or anything like that, but I've had periods where I've done meditation pretty intensely. Martial arts practice, I think anything that increases your embodiment, right, where you're connected to your body in the present moment is helpful for this kind of thing. Also, I promised two
wacky things, or 2 silver bullets.
Another one is a jump into an ice bath. Because what that does is, as well, it shows you that there's a difference between the you that's deciding to be in the cold water and all the other parts of you. First of all, your nervous system is like, get the hell out. and you can start noticing the dialogue. There's part of you that says, what are you doing here? This is not right. And it's weird because what you basically notice is that there's not just one of you, right? That you are essentially many, and different parts of you come up at different times. And it's when you do something like that, like you jump into cold water, really cold water, and let's say you want to stay in for a minute. That's a very long minute if the water is properly cold. And you will notice that there is a you that made the decision to stay in for a minute, fighting something else. So again, that's something that I think you can use to almost kickstart that awareness and start paying attention. And I think it's also a very strong exercise for self-regulation. We go, there's me versus this very strong, almost primal impulse to just get out of the cold, right? And it shows you that you have control. You can decide to stay in, and which is not much different from the urge to watch porn versus me who's decided not to watch porn. So that's another way to do it. And listen, I think that developing awareness is a key component to overcoming addiction. And that's often the missing piece, is you don't have this awareness. And in fact, that's one of the mechanisms of addiction, is essentially that your midbrain takes over, right? So like your decision-making brain shuts down and you go into autopilot mode.
Yeah.
And you have to counter that with awareness, right? You have to counter it before that switch happens.
You have to activate the prefrontal cortex to kind of bring yourself back up online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, there's no way around it, I think. For an addict, there's no way around really developing awareness through some practice like meditation and writing and so on. There's no way around it.
Mm-hmm. And what's your relationship? Because again, sexual shame is such a big part of your story and part of so many people's stories. And, I might not agree with you 100%, but probably like 98% of your story around like, if you had no sexual shame, would you still watch porn? I think my own take on that is that even if you didn't have sexual shame, if you had some pain in your life that you were trying to escape from, you might still reach out to porn.
Yeah, that's fair. I would agree with that, yeah.
But I'm curious, what's your relationship to shame or sexual shame now in your life?
Yeah, so right now it is, I wouldn't say that I'm like 100% healed from this or anything like that, but I have definitely, let's say, upgraded the quality of my problems, right? A lot, where it's still something where I'm kind of looking for. So that's also, in fact, I think growth often happens in kind of waves, right? Where it's not just a linear, everything gets better all the time. So I had an experience in my life where I spent a lot of time working on this. Things got a lot better. And I was in a relationship where it seemed like this is it, right? I've reached enlightenment.
Enlightenment, yeah. it's all peace from here on out.
Exactly. But what happened later is that some new experiences in my life brought back up some of the old patterns.
The deeply rooted behaviors that are still there.
Yeah, exactly. So there's still some deeply rooted stuff that I'm still working on. But whereas, before it was absolutely crippling, right? This was the problem in my life, really. Right. Whereas now it's like, okay, I can notice there are certain things where I still feel a little bit tense or a bit stuck up, but I'm able to work on that. I'm able to communicate about it. I used to just freeze up, right?
Right.
I couldn't talk about
Freeze up and then escape, watch porn, eat food.
Exactly. Whereas now I'm in a situation where I can say, oh, I'm feeling this thing, I'm feeling really stuck, but the partner I'm with, I can talk to them about it,
Right.
So so that's why I say, it's not like this is a completely done deal for me, but it has become this manageable thing. It also has become something where I'm like, okay, I keep exploring this to explore and find like higher and higher levels of freedom, essentially. So I'm very, very far removed from like the depth of suffering that I started in.
Yeah.
And part of that is definitely also with other people, right? Like other people make a big difference here, where, actually having relations with women, both sexual relations with women, romantic relationships, but also female friends who have who've taught me a lot about, interacting in a healthy way with femininity. And even just like the experience of seeing that, okay, my own sexual desire can be a gift. I think that's a really important insight, because it used to feel, and I remember this really, that my sexual desire felt like a bad thing that I had to hide from other people, right?
Yeah.
And learning that under the right circumstances, my sexual desire can be the greatest gift.
Right.
And kind of having that experience and letting that experience sink in, like realizing, okay, it's not a black and white thing. You know? Because of course, if I'm like, I don't know, if I'm out in public, I see an attractive woman and I feel a sexual desire for her, but she's not interested in me, or she's there with her husband or whatever, it's inappropriate. This is not a place for me to express my sexual desire, right? Yeah. So like learning that it's not, because I think that the idea was that it was just black and white. It's always a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. It's also not always a good thing. Yeah. But depending on the context.
Yeah. And your relationship to it.
And my relationship to it, it can be a wonderful thing. And learning, and which is also, I think, part of maturing, And also you will make mistakes, right? You will misstep sometimes. Yeah. So
letting yourself be human.
Exactly. Because yes, of course there will be moments where, maybe I try to flirt with someone and it doesn't go well.
Right, yeah.
Okay, that's too bad.
Right.
But instead of going like, oh my God, I was right. It's a terrible thing. I have to hide this from the world and like turtling up again. Just saying, oh, this was a mistake, right? This was a miscalibration. It's fine. Life goes on. And maybe next time it's going to be great.
I think in my opinion, that's so important for people to understand is how to own their sexuality and see it as you said, like it can be the greatest gift in the world or just a beautiful joy that you can embrace, you know, because sexuality, attraction, desire, these are all beautiful qualities of being human. It's when it starts to become a source of shame or, you know, we start to cultivate some bad habits, some, you know, self-sabotage type of stuff. That's when it gets in the way. But, you know, learning how to approach a woman and just say, hey, I think you're beautiful. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Yeah. And if she says no, it's just, okay, no problem.
It's totally fine. Yeah.
As opposed to, oh no, I made her uncomfortable and I'm a bad person. And,
yeah, exactly. Which also, I think, you know, a huge thing that I used to deal with a lot is that I kind of took too much responsibility for other people's feelings, you know, because even in a relationship context, like you were just saying, right, you over project into the situation. It's like, oh my God, she's so creeped out, I ruined her day. No, she's already forgotten about you 5 minutes later, right? Yeah. So chill.
Right.
But also in a relationship context, to just be so worried about, oh my God, I hurt her feelings, this is terrible, and so on. Whereas like actually learning that my job is kind of just to show up and be me.
Right.
I'm not responsible for other people's feelings.
Yeah.
And yeah, getting comfortable with that. Like it's not always going to be perfect, right?
And if your partner is cold, you know, you say something, your partner is cold or moody, you know, it might have nothing to do with you. You can go the whole day overthinking it, thinking, oh, you know, she's upset with me because I've said this, and realizing maybe they just had something happen at work and they needed time to process it. And you didn't need to go in and try to micromanage and fix
exactly, it. Yeah, exactly. But even that, you know, I think that one thing that I also see in the whole men's self-development, like manosphere space, is I see a lot of relational pain. And I think that a lot of guys are probably in a similar situation that I was in when I was younger, where you are starved of female attention, and you're starved of affection and love and connection, intimacy, yeah. And it turns into anger for a lot of guys. It turns into anger, right? Because, again, what we're talking about here, and this is also, I really want to push guys into that uncomfortable zone, because I see a lot of it, you know, you have like, you've got the nofap and the semen retention and all this kind of stuff where it's like retreat, right? Retreat from the world. And yes, we're going to stop watching porn and we're going to stop jerking off and we're going to stop even having orgasms. But also we reject women because women are the worst, right? There's this whole like red pill, black pill narrative that...
What's the incels.
Incels, yeah. And so this has gained a lot of traction, right? There's a lot of guys identify with some version of that, where the belief is often also that, yeah, it's basically women are terrible, or they, you know, love isn't real is like a black pill thing, right? And they're all...
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. So where it's like, and the whole also like genetic determinism, right? If you don't have the right jawline and you're at least 6'2" and blah, 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 then you're never going to have a woman anyway. And it's not worth it because they're all hypergamous and after your money and blah, blah, blah. There's this whole extremely toxic view of that essentially rejects this whole idea, right? So instead of like trying to heal your sexuality, instead of learning about
how to embrace it in a healthy way.
Yeah, and learning about like the masculine, feminine interplay and so on, you're just like, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to walk away from this. And it feels kind of heroic in like a broody, you know, the tragic hero kind of way. But listen, you're really just fleeing, right? You're really just retreating instead of actually dealing with the problem. And of course, some of the stuff that we've just talked about here is only going to work if you get your basic social life in order, and you actually put yourself in situations where you can talk to women, and you actually develop the courage to talk to women, let them know if you're attracted, which also means you have to deal with rejection, because guess what? You're going to get rejected most of the time, right? Even if you're very attractive, like most of the time, she already has a boyfriend, whatever, you're not her type, whatever, right? Yeah. So there's a whole lot of stuff that you have to deal with if you want to get to the point where you can start to develop a healthy sexuality that isn't, I mean, you can do some work on that on your own, But ultimately, it has to involve other people, right?
Yeah.
And you have to put yourself out there, which is uncomfortable, and it can be a long and painful path. But I really want to invite guys to do that, right? To accept the quest, essentially, right? Which is also something that I believe strongly, is that the pain you are in, right, the pain you're currently in, is really an invitation to a quest. There's an adventure that you need to go on in order to get yourself into a better situation.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be easy. It's not something you consume, right? It's not something where you just take this pill and click the button and it solves all your problems.
Yeah, we've almost lost the idea of going on a quest or a journey or an adventure, like the hero's journey. Like now we live in such a quick fix, instant gratification society that the idea of undergoing something difficult for the sake of growing and learning about yourself is almost lost to our whole generation.
Yeah. And listen, I hugely believe this, and it's definitely been true in my own life, is that there is a connection between like how difficult, how challenging the adventure is and how much growth you get out of it.
Yeah.
Because for me, this whole sexual shame thing was really a huge, huge problem. And I'm never going to pretend like this was easy or there's, some secret shortcut or whatever. So you got to do the work. But the flip side of that, and I've often thought about this with great gratitude, the flip side of that is that I have had amazing experiences with sex and sexuality and relationships because I've had to work on it so much. Right?
Yeah.
I was never in the kind of comfortable, complacent zone where you can find yourself, it's like, oh yeah, I have a girlfriend, I kind of, we like each other, it's okay.
Yeah.
We have sex like once a week, it's okay. It's fine, it's comfortable, it's too comfortable to change anything. I was never there. For me, this was such a big problem. Like I had to do something big, right? Yeah. Which means that I've explored this part of my life to much greater depth than most guys ever will. And I've had probably better experiences than most guys ever have because of that. But that's the flip side of an enormous amount of hard work that I had to do, right?
And it's so funny because I've talked about this before on this podcast, but like sometimes the rock bottom moments are the most beautiful things. Like I'm so grateful for my own past with addiction, my own rock bottom moments, because those were the moments that set me on a path of learning about actual happiness and meaning and purpose and all these things. And that, as you say, if your life is kind of in this Goldilocks zone where it's kind of okay, it's not like amazing, but it's also not that bad, you're just like, why do I need to fix it? And you almost need to go to one of these rock bottom moments to recognize, hey, I actually need to make a fundamental shift.
Yeah. And so that's, I think that's a really important message for guys who are deep in suffering. It's just, dude, stop refusing the quest.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful.
This is calling you to action. Do the thing. You're already suffering. So go slay the dragon. It's already bad, right?
Yeah.
So go make your life suck even more for a while so that you can come out the other end.
Yeah. What would help somebody do that? Let's say somebody's in the midst of suffering right now where everything is dark, everything's depressing, there's no hope. What would you tell someone to help them get through that?
Well, if there's no hope, I think that's part of the problem. And I think it can be helpful to get the sense that this is possible. Right?
Yeah.
It can be helpful to get the sense that this is possible. Like if the situation is that there's no hope, I would suggest that you just start doing some things that you know are good for you and just be like, listen, everything sucks already, so it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to go to the gym. And I hate going to the gym. Who cares? You hate getting up early in the morning and going to the gym and lifting. Who cares? You already hate your life anyway. Right. Just do it anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
if everything sucks already, you might as well just do some more sucky things. And
exactly.
Yeah, but things that are good for you.
Exactly. So, and I feel like, you could easily okay, make sure that you work out hard every day. And maybe you take up meditation. You're like, oh, I fucking hate just sitting here doing nothing. Okay, good. There's another thing that basically doesn't matter, right? You might as well. And or maybe take up some writing or something like that. Because like I said, if that's the situation where you're like hopeless, just start doing these things and see what happens.
I like what you said also about kind of, the first thing you got to fix is the hope issue. And I think for I know a lot of the guys that I've talked with and worked with in the past, one of the pivotal kind of changing moments was reading stories about people that had changed their life. Exactly. Like reading stories of people who have been so addicted to porn and then were able to quit and break free. Yeah. And I think seeing those success stories can be really helpful for...
Listen, I always, and I agree, I think that's also where content like this can be really useful. You know, just hearing people talk, reading stories, like you said, seeing examples that make you go, oh, maybe it's possible. I always tell people, like, you are massively underestimating yourself. So many guys are like, I can't quit. What the hell are you talking about? Right. You are a human being. You're the absolute apex predator on this planet, right? You're the most capable, most dangerous, most fearsome thing on this planet, right? Yeah. If you read about the history of how humanity spreads across the world, it is a fucking disaster for everything else, right? Humans show up, changes everything, right? They raise the entire forest on the entire island. Extinction events have been happening driven by humans for tens of thousands of years. This is not a recent phenomenon. It's accelerated a lot recently, but it's not a recent phenomenon. Like, humans show up, they fuck shit up. Right?
What you're saying is we're badasses.
We are, from the perspective of any other animal, we are a horror show, right? We are so incredibly capable. And you individually are the result of an unbroken line of successful survival and procreation that goes back to the dawn of time, right? And you're here going, oh, I can't stop myself from looking at the thing on the screen. That is ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. Like, you are so capable. And, you know, to take this like even further, the idea where, you know, people can recover from porn, people can recover from all kinds of addictions. People can come back from the brink of death like you wouldn't believe. There are stories of people who've, you know, in some gnarly accident, broken every single bone in their body.
And gone through rehab.
Yeah, and everybody declares them dead, you know, and then like 5 years later, they're running a marathon. You know, one book that really kind of blew my mind with that is there's a book called Cured by Jeffrey Rediger, which is, it's not about addiction, it's about people with basically chronic, untreatable illnesses. It's like, you have someone who's got, you know, 7 types of deadly cancer. And everybody just writes them off as like, listen, just, you know, go say goodbye to your family, basically. There's nothing we can do here, right? And these people claw themselves back from the brink. And, you know, some of the stories are like, some of the stories, it almost made me, you know, it's like you get tears in your eyes from the sympathy pains of what you're reading, you know? You're just like, oh my God, can you imagine this? People turn their lives around from unbelievably bad circumstances. And I would really invite, like, anyone who feels, look, we all like to feel sorry for ourselves, right? There's some satisfaction we get out of that. But listen, be real here. Your own capability to overcome adversity. Yeah, there's just no way, you know, again, like, you're making yourself an exception here. There's no way, you know, in your line of ancestry, people have overcome unbelievable adversity.
Right.
You're the result of all that. The idea that you can't overcome this is ridiculous.
I like you also said kind of the self-pity, you know, it also, people like it because it feels good. And it's almost like it's just another thing that we're addicted to. The dopamine hit of self-pity. Yeah. You know, it's like we're sucked into porn, we're sucked into junk food, we're sucked into self-pity because they're all these things that kind of numb us out.
So this is another thing where awareness can be really helpful, I think, because so something that's really useful is if you start labeling the stories and the cycles that happen. And this, again, writing can help with this because because what happens is, look, the thing is, everybody's always going through loops, okay? And once you write it down, once you go, okay, this is what happened, you know, and I'm poor me, you know, you write down your self-pity story, right? Oh, I'm the worst, and I'm suffering so much, and nobody understands that. You've written it down. Okay, first of all, you'll probably feel better from writing it. But what will also happen is that the next time the same story comes along, you're like, I've already, you know, you start writing, you're like, wait a minute.
It's the 20th time this story has come up today.
Exactly. Yeah. You're like, wait, we've already been through this. I actually know this script already, you know? Because the truth is that most of the things you experience is the same script playing again and again and again and again. And awareness can again give you that disconnect where you just go, oh, it's this old train of thought. I think of it as trains of thought, right? Like a train of thought shows up in your mind. It's like all aboard. And just like, I know this train. I know exactly where it's going. Listen, if I get on board this train of thought, I know exactly the part of this journey that I'm going to be on 5 minutes from now, right? Because I've done it so often. And it just gives you that ability to be like, oh, do I have to go through this mind loop for the 100th time? No, I can just not. I'll just not get on board, you know?
What would you say to someone who says, yeah, I get it, it's a habit loop, it's a train of thought, but it's based on my reality. Like, I am a piece of shit. What would you say to somebody who says, I know it's just a thought, but I also think my reality is that I am lazy?
Well, that's okay. Basically, that's a separate problem of you can still believe that you're a lazy piece of shit, but do you have to go through the 10-minute self-pity story again?
Or it's what do you do about it if that's the case?
Yeah.
Do you sit there and wallow in it, or do you say, okay, I'm a lazy piece of shit. Yeah. How am I going to get myself out of this?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And you know, I'm a huge fan of accepting the current reality as it is. So
not sugarcoating and putting rose-colored glasses over it.
And also not catastrophizing, right? Because if your story is, oh, I'm such a lazy piece of shit, I'm the worst, I deserve nothing.
Right,
it's like,
that's the spiraling.
Yeah, it's like, no, you're not the worst.
Right.
You're not the worst, come on.
Well, somebody is.
Yeah, somebody is.
There's one unlucky son of a bitch out there who's actually the worst.
Yeah, that's true. But everyone else, but what are the chances that it's you, right?
Small chance that you're actually the worst one.
Yeah. So, but like just being super realistic and being like, okay, listen, my life's currently going nowhere. I have all these terrible habits. I am lazy and so on. Being real about it.
Taking ownership of the ways that you're not living up to your potential.
Yeah. But again, like you can do that without wallowing in self-pity. Right. You can just say, well, here are the facts. Right? You
know, it's so interesting because I see so many parallels between that we just talked about. Like you can recognize the ways that you're not optimizing your life without wallowing in self-pity. And the parallel between that and, to me, it feels very similar to, what we talked about earlier with approaching a woman and letting her know that you're interested in her and she rejects you, but you don't wallow in shame. You're just like, oh, yeah, I got rejected, but that's okay. And the same like, oh, I was lazy this morning and didn't do what I said I was going to do, but that's okay. Let me just try better next time. Exactly. And they feel very similar in terms of that, like, being just straightforward, realistic, like, oh, I can do better.
And that's something you can cultivate. Now, another thing that is maybe a bit more practical, again, if we're talking to like the guy who feels a bit hopeless, who feels totally lost, especially for young men, I think what's super important is that you have to have what I call a skill crucible, which is you have to have some activity in your life that is deeply engaging, where you build a skill. Mm-hmm. And ideally, this is happening away from screens, all right? And this is especially true for porn addicts, right? Mm-hmm. It's ideal if this is something that's happening away from screens. So for me, this was martial arts, right? Like I mentioned, this was the first thing that I did where I didn't feel like a loser. Yeah. Like everything else I tried, I was always, I get bad grades in school. I'm not one of the cool kids. I'm not good at football. I'm not good at, everything I tried, I was like, I'm one of the losers, right?
Yeah.
With martial arts, for some reason, something clicked for me. I was like, oh, I'm not terrible at this. And I also then realized, the more time I spend training, the better I get.
Gives you that self-efficacy that you can grow.
Yeah. And I got obsessed with it, right? I got obsessed with it, which I think is very healthy for a young man to be obsessed with something like that.
Something physical where you're using your body and your mind and that,
And it's this bottomless well of more stuff to learn,
Yeah, skill improvement. So video game doesn't count.
A video game is not great. It's not great. And simply look, the main problem I see with porn addicts and video games is that you're doing it in the same environment where your porn addiction is happening. You're doing it in front of the same screen. It doesn't give you like the physical movement that would help your brain rewire. It doesn't put you in a different environment, so it's just not ideal, right? Yeah. I'm not against video games in general. I'm not like, video games are bad or anything like that. But it's not very helpful.
Yeah. So we're talking about like martial arts. I mean, aside from physical, like sports and martial arts, what are some things for the skill crucible?
Yeah, it can be anything. Like it could also be, I don't know,
Wood carving or something.
yeah, wood carving, or you know, I don't know, building robots, or
Okay.
or a fascination with some kind of a topic, you know, where it's like, oh, I'm learning about nutrition. This is one of the things. I always have like periods of like slight obsession with topics, you know. For a few years I was just obsessed with nutrition. I was reading all these books about nutrition, but then of course there's also like a real life aspect to it as well. I'm like buying food, cooking food, preparing meals, right?
I mean, cooking could be another one. Where,
Cooking can be great, yeah. Anything artistic as well, like you were saying, you know, wood carving or
painting,
graffiti or whatever, right? So anything like that can be really good. You know, even like an obsession with, basically picking up girls, right? With that's your pain point. I have seen guys go through that as their skill crucible, where, you know, usually it gets a bit unhealthy. Right? It's like your obsession with, I'm going to be the pickup artist, and you're talking to all the girls and so on. You're probably going to take it too far, but it's generally fine as long as you're really committed to pursuing this skill and to keep learning. You're probably going to take it a bit too far. You're probably going to make mistakes, but again, that's just human. But overall, that can be a really good thing because of all the stuff you learn. As long as, I think that the most important thing is you have to find something that engages you so much that you keep wanting to dig deeper, because most things can lead you to most things can have this effect that I described in the beginning of martial arts, right? Where you start by just being like, I'm going to learn how to punch and kick. But the further you pursue it, the more you get into other topics like psychology and like general self-development and philosophy and so on. And I think most things are like that. Because even if you start with just, hey, I just want to get laid, so I'm going to learn how to pick up girls. If you're committed to continually digging deeper, you will start to learn about psychology and social dynamics and all kinds of stuff. And I think if you do it right, you're probably going to go through a phase where it's like dehumanizing. You know, it's just like notches on the belt. But then if you really keep pursuing it, you come back to really understanding, empathizing with the opposite sex, really understanding what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think it can be then a positive thing in the end, you know.
It's interesting. So before I got into meditation and mindfulness in a big way, I also got into, reading the game and pickup artists, that kind of stuff. One of the fascinating things in my life, and I know this is true for a lot of people, is that sometimes the most beneficial thing that can happen is that you become super successful at something and you get to the kind of the peak apex of that, whatever skill it is, whether it's academic pursuit or sports or whatever. And you get to the top and you realize that it doesn't actually have what you're looking for. It doesn't have like the lasting fulfillment that you thought would be at the top, at the peak. And for me, that was the case in my academic pursuits and my life. Like everything was so good externally. And I got to the top and realized that it didn't actually make me happier. And so I imagine that, and I'm pretty sure it's true, a lot of these guys who pursue the pickup artist thing and get really good at it, and can end up, sleeping with a bunch of women, but then they do that for a while and realize that it still feels empty.
Totally.
And that's when, and it's interesting, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is we were connecting at a Christmas and talking about how, porn and porn addiction in some ways is just a gateway to deeper fulfillment. Like the work you need to do to overcome porn addiction is a gateway to finding that deeper happiness and that real personal development.
Exactly. And even the stuff we were talking about before, like developing awareness, well, guess what, if your motivation to develop deeper awareness is because you want to overcome the pain of your porn addiction, that's a good enough reason to start. But later you'll realize that your life is overall just much better because you developed awareness, right? So it's actually one of those things too.
It's almost like awareness is kind of self-cleaning. Like as long as there's awareness, it will do the work on itself to put you in the right direction.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's also the ideal, because all the stuff we talked about. And by the way, I think entrepreneurship is another good one. Like entrepreneurship, any kind of taking on a project, creating something, building something is
learning how to invest. All these.
Yeah. That's a great potential skill crucible as well. And yeah, I think, like you say, we tend to, I think of this as the finish line fallacy, right? We tend to think that there's some finish line. Once I cross it, everything is fine. But when you cross that line, it's like, oh, things are still the same. But again, that's a learning moment, isn't it? And the great thing about doing something like this is that these kinds of things, physical activity, doing things out in the real world, pursuing real world goals, and doing all the skill building, the learning and so on associated with it, is one of the best things you can do to heal your brain and to strengthen the parts of your brain that are weakened by porn consumption. There's also like this essentially this dual effect. If you do this, even if you do it for the sake of it, and even if it doesn't lead to the lasting fulfillment that you maybe hoped it would, the things that you've done to your brain and your mind in the process will put you in a much better place, right? So that's another reason why, and again, to get back to the starting point of, someone who's kind of suffering, someone who's hopeless, doing all of the stuff we've just talked about will just put you in a much better place. It will put you in a place of greater power, because even if it's like, hey, I got really into skateboarding and I learned this physical skill, I spent more time outdoors, I moving around and so on. And so I developed myself physically, but also I did a lot of stuff, like my brain looks different. And if you've gotten really good at skateboarding, your brain looks different than before, because of all the things you've gotten yourself to learn and do. And you will also find that now you're in a position, you have a much healthier brain, and you have demonstrated to yourself that your time and effort invested in something leads to change, which that's your source of hope, Yeah. For me, this was, again, for me with martial arts, this was so important because it was the first thing that I felt like, oh, I can actually be good at this. And where I learned that if I invest time and effort into something, I get better, this is the source of hope that I've carried in my life in everything else. I just go, hey, this is difficult. This business stuff is difficult. I guess I need to spend time and effort to get better, and eventually something works,
It's fascinating how all these things, they're so intertwined. Like we're talking about self-efficacy, nutrition. This sounds also a lot like growth mindset, which is it's so interesting because it felt like it was really popular for a couple of years, and it's kind of died down now, but it's just so critical, understanding that change is possible. Like if you can't do something, you can't do it yet, but if you keep working at it, you can change. And it's just so fascinating how all of these topics are so intertwined, and we kind of need all these different facets to grow.
Yeah, I agree. Like developing a growth mindset is super important. Again, the skill crucible is, I think, that's one of the things it's supposed to do essentially, right? That's one of the reasons I recommend it. But also, I would say that the truth is, if someone's listening and thinking, well, I don't have a growth mindset, I don't believe that I can change. Well, the truth is, you've already demonstrated to yourself that how you spend your time and energy leads to change. Because guess what? You've gotten really good at being addicted to porn.
Yeah.
Right? And I know that's a weird way to say it, but you have trained your brain to do this.
Yeah.
And look at how efficient it is now.
Yeah. It's just people need to go through the dip of being really bad at something in the beginning, and that's uncomfortable.
Yeah. But in essence, right, any habit in the brain essentially works like your brain doesn't actually know the difference between good and bad habits. So if you've successfully developed a bad habit, you've already proven to yourself that you're capable of developing habits.
That's really fascinating to look at it that way. That it's kind of agnostic about whether it's a healthy habit or unhealthy. It's just based on the reward structure and dopamine. And
from a mechanical standpoint, almost, right? It's just a certain reinforcing process in your brain.
Where do you go to when you feel like you're in kind of a unmotivated place? What do you do to kind of re-inspire yourself?
For me, it's always physicality first. So a reminder I have that I think of often is that I need to remember to do the things that are good for me when I'm not feeling good. And I need to remember to do the things that are good for me when I'm feeling good.
In other words, always do the things that are good for you.
Yeah. But both of those are important because obviously when you're depressed or whatever, feeling bad, you can then tell yourself, oh, I feel too bad to go to the gym. No. You need to go to the gym because you feel bad, right? But at the same time, we also, and this is a very human thing, you take the medication then you feel better and you think,
Yeah,
I need the medication anymore.
Not realizing it's the medication that's making you feel better.
Exactly. So you also have to remember, so, because I've gone through this cycle a couple of times where I'll feel terrible and I'll be like, okay, I'm getting my life together, and I start going to the gym, I start meditating, I start doing all these things. Then I feel better and I stop doing those things. And before I know it, I feel bad again. So, but this is also where habit building comes in. For me, for example, the habit of exercising is just so solidly ingrained that it's not something that requires discipline. It's just something I do.
Yeah. And at some point, it actually... it's so pleasurable in itself that you end up wanting to do it.
Exactly, yeah. And so, but yeah, like to answer your question, right? If I'm struggling, the first thing I always look for is physicality. Like, okay, can I exercise more? Can I somehow bring more movement into my life? And also just the basics, right? Look, your environment and your lifestyle basics have a huge impact on your mood and your energy levels and so on.
Like sleep, nutrition, and exercise.
Exactly. So if you do things like, if it's possible, right, like get sunlight in the morning, just see sunlight in the morning, even if it's just for a few minutes. Make sure that you exercise at least once a day. I have to say, I think like official guidelines for how much you should exercise are always something ridiculously like 70 minutes a week or something ridiculous. Like, no. Exercise at least once a day. I used to be like that too. They're like, oh, I go to the gym 3 times a week. I'm fit. No. What? You only move every other day?
Right.
What
it means 4 days a week. You're just sitting on your ass doing nothing.
Yeah. It's like, no. It's got to be at least once a day.
Well, I like that you said, what you said earlier is just find ways to move your body more. Because for some people, they can't imagine exercising every day, but, moving your body, walking around, like taking the stairs.
Totally. And find a way, find something that works for you. Like, for example, something I do a lot is I will put on an audiobook and go for a walk. And often, like not here, we're in Bali right now, is like you can't really walk here. There's no sidewalks.
That's horrible.
Yeah. But, so it depends on where you live, right? But whenever it's possible, I will often spend an hour or more a day walking, and usually listening to something. And it combines 2 things that I like, So I'm outside, I'm moving, and it's not like strenuous exercise, but I'm moving my body, and I'm essentially reading, and I'm learning things which are interesting to me, right? And with exercise, when I say exercise, like personally, I like to lift weights and stuff like that, but obviously it's not for everyone. But I think everyone can find something they like, There's like a million sports you can do. You can find something you enjoy enough that it doesn't feel like torture. Mm-hmm. And also with your nutrition. I mean, nutrition is a bit of a tricky one.
There's just too many theories out there these days.
Although even there, right? If you, a lot of guys need to develop this basic skill. You need to learn how to feed yourself, right? And frankly, it's embarrassing if you can't feed yourself properly, right? But it's something. It's one of those things you can learn in a sprint. If you spend a month learning how to cook real food.
And it's also not rocket science. Like just, less junk food. So just eat more real foods. Yeah,
basically, I think the simplest guideline for good food is like eat things that don't have a nutrition label.
Exactly. Real, whether it's plants or animals,
That's the easy thing to do. But again, like some guys really, you have to go through a period of actually learning how to do this, right? If you can't feed yourself properly, it affects your mental state and your capability so strongly, right? I can't overstate how important this is. But some guys need to learn it first. And you have to build those basics into your life, because the truth is that basically the normal, the quote unquote normal in the world that we live in is ridiculously bad for you, right? The whole thing with even just light exposure, the idea that you wake up and stare at the screen right away, and you get little to no actual sunlight, and you're staring at screens and artificial light sources all day long until late into the night. This is so bad for you. You have no idea how bad this is for you because you can't remember a time before this. But this is incredibly bad for you. And, like you can read a book like The Circadian Code by Sachin Panda is a pretty good book. On Why We Sleep by Matt Walker is a pretty good book. To get an idea of how incredibly important sleep is. and how disruptive our lifestyle is to sleep. And it's kind of crazy that we have to talk about this, but the truth is that very few people get adequate sleep, right? Very few people get enough sleep and high quality sleep. And this is maybe this is another point I want to make. Like I was talking about the quest, right? It's like your current suffering is a call to a quest. And I want to encourage guys to be like, listen, the truth is being addicted to porn is normal. Right now, virtually every guy you meet is addicted to porn. It's completely normal. And it is normal in the same way that eating more junk food than real food is normal. It's normal in the same way that being addicted to like 5 different things is normal, right? Most people are addicted to porn and social media, and maybe they smoke cigarettes, maybe they drink alcohol, maybe there's some medication. Right? That's normal.
Yeah.
It is normal, like loads and loads of extremely unhealthy things are normal. And the truth is, look, you can somehow eliminate porn out of your life and it'll make your life better, no doubt. But use this opportunity to improve your life. And one of the things you have to do is you have to stop being normal. You have to stop being average. This is not working for us, okay? And this is an opportunity to be like, no, I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to reject porn, which is the most common drug for guys. And you know what? I'm going to reject all this other stuff that's bad for me too. It's like I am actually going to use this as a way to become exceptional and get better results. To me, that's the invitation. If you've realized I'm suffering because of porn use this to open your eyes to all the other shit that's going wrong too. Right? Use this to transform your life. This can be, like you said, the rock bottom here can be the best thing that will ever happen to you if you actually take this seriously and use it to transform your life.
Right. I love that kind of what you're bringing up. It's like, and this relates back to what we talked about earlier, that, the porn addiction isn't really the problem. The porn addiction is a symptom of a deeper issue going on. And all of these addictions that we have, whether it's to porn or junk food or social media or to money, to validation, they're all symptoms of the deeper issue. And they're all invitations to kind of look deeper and say, okay, what's the real issue going on here? How do I find real inner peace, real happiness, real optimized living?
Totally. Yeah. And I would say that in a similar way that for me, the whole huge problem with sex and sexual shame was essentially an invitation to go on a path of sexual mastery. It's like your addiction to porn is an invitation to develop self-mastery. To develop self-mastery to carry over into all aspects of life. And yeah, this is why, in a way, people who listen to stuff like this have realized I've got a problem with porn, I want to do something about it. I'm so excited for you, man. Yeah. I'm so excited for you. Listen, if you take this seriously, your life is going to be so much better in the future than it would have been without this catalyst,
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating because, like you say, the very rare are the people who are attuned to the ways that this is affecting their life. Most people are like, it's not that big of a deal. And part of me wants to say like, hey, live your life and do you. And there are probably a handful of people out there who can have a healthy relationship to porn and it doesn't really affect them. But for the majority of people, there's just kind of an ignorance and a lack of self-awareness of the ways that it's screwing with their dopamine network and screwing with their happiness and their relationships. And one question I'm just curious to ask you, like, is there, because you've been in this self-development, personal development space for a while, and also in the porn addiction, sexual healing world, is there any advice out there that you see that you disagree with, that like a common stuff? And obviously we talked about the red pill, black pill stuff, like we don't need to, because that's kind of the far extreme that most people listening to this aren't into that. But is there anything out there that you see as kind of common advice that you think differently too? Well,
for sure that, the most common sources, it seems to me, for information on the porn problem are either NoFap or something religion-based. And both of those have, I think, too much emphasis on like not masturbating and no sexual activity.
Too much repression.
Too much repression, yes. And whereas the part where I disagree is this: I think that, first of all, for a lot of guys, it's a good idea to prioritize quitting porn. And if you need to keep masturbating in order to quit porn, that's fine. Because look, the truth is, if you had a porn addiction, then you probably have unhealthy masturbation habits, which is to say that through masturbation and fantasizing about pornographic scenes and stuff, you are holding on to some of the bad habits. And you do have to abstain from masturbation to heal that part as well. But you don't have to do them both at the same time. I see loads of people who, essentially do the nofap thing. So they stop watching porn and they stop masturbating. And a lot of them, especially a lot of the younger guys, have never masturbated without porn. So it's never even occurred to them, right? And then what happens is they get super strong urges and they relapse.
Binge and
exactly
spiral out of control.
On a porn binge and masturbation binge. And when I'm like, look, if this is you, stop porn and keep masturbating. And get to at least 90 days of being porn free, and then assess your masturbation situation, right? Because it's possible that over the course of 90 days, a whole bunch of stuff is going to happen, right? You might flatline, you might basically lose your sexual desire for a while altogether. This might calibrate in. And, my opinion is, look, if you show me some guy who masturbates a couple of times a week without porn, I don't think that person has a big problem. I'm not like rushing to rescue that guy compared to the masses of guys who are spending all day watching porn, right? So it's like, that's where I'm at. Like, you might arrive at a place where it's like, you still have a masturbation habit, but it's not excessive anymore. But and I do think that once you are solidly porn free, once you've gotten to the point where you have the habit of not watching porn and you don't constantly have urges anymore, then it's probably a good idea to also go like 30 days or so masturbation free. Again, because there's maybe some more healing that needs to happen there. And then after that, it's up to you to decide if you want to not masturbate. I think there's not that much. People love to go to extremes, right? So you have like the nofap, and then you have the semen retention and all this kind of stuff. I'm pretty skeptical of that. But I also think that's not the problem. The problem is porn, right? The access, like immediate access to high-speed porn in everyone's pocket, has led to a whole slew of mental health and sexual issues that we didn't have before. But we've been masturbating since opposing thumbs existed, right?
Yeah.
So masturbation has been around for eons, and it wasn't the problem before. This is why my opinion is that masturbation isn't the source of the problem. And how much you masturbate is basically, I don't care, right? Because, again, there are guys who, even without porn, masturbate excessively, have a masturbation problem. This is pretty rare. The truth is, that's pretty rare. The real source of the problem is porn. And I'll take it one step further. What I noticed from, since I've been creating content in this niche, from interacting with people, is that a lot of guys do not, basically, in their minds, porn, masturbation, and sex have fused together. They don't really understand that those are three separate things. And you can see that often in the comments on my videos. There's great confusion about this. So where people are like, oh, but I read some study that says that sex is healthy. It's like, yeah, but I was talking about porn.
Right.
I wasn't talking about sex.
Yeah.
Right, but it's clearly like they don't understand that there's something different between, and even on content where I've pointed this out and explained this, you can see the confusion in the reactions of people. It's like, how can this be true? How can it be true that having sex with a real person is different from masturbating in front of a screen? And it's like, from my perspective, it's like, well, how can it not be true? But clearly because there are guys who have only ever experienced, like the only sexual experience they have is masturbating to porn. They don't realize that those are separate things. So I would say that part of the healing process is actually, you need to learn to masturbate without porn. And I think that's probably healthier than holding in your semen for some reason, right? To actually unfuse that in your mind and to realize that you can experience bodily pleasure without this overstimulation, without this visual stimulation, without all this fetish stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Actually learning something in the direction of like a tantric practice, right? Where you can pleasure yourself and just focus on the physical sensations without making a crazy porno in your head, because that's what most guys need to get off, right? So I would actually, in a way, I'm like the opposite of nofap, right? I'm almost like profap, right? It's like you
just without porn.
Yeah, you need to heal your brain from porn. But if you want to then go deeper on the journey of sexual mastery, you have to get to the point where you can just experience sexual pleasure uncoupled from porn.
From the junk food of porn.
Exactly. And also, and this is also a big thing, right? Uncoupled from the shame and so on, right? Because how many guys feel ashamed about masturbation, feel like, oh, I shouldn't do this. And this whole like semen retention alpha male stuff also reinforces that, right? It's like, oh, the real Giga Chad doesn't touch himself, right?
Well, interestingly, so some of the people I follow who are big proponents of semen retention are also proponents of self-pleasure.
Right.
So I think it depends on who you're talking to, but there are a lot of people in the semen retention that are, talk about healthy masturbation and self-pleasure.
Where it's more of a tantric thing.
Exactly.
Well.
Yeah, as opposed to kind of a repression, just monk mode type of.
Exactly. And that's also like, this is why, I don't say that I'm against semen retention or anything. I would just say I'm a skeptic, because what I'm talking about is I see a lot of 16-year-olds who have a porn habit, who try to go straight to semen retention, or they talk about, it's almost like, it's just weird, right? I compare it to, it's like if you have two guys talking about some detail of an optimized training plan, it's like, oh, should you take creatine once a day, or should you take like 3 times a day?
And they get hyper focused on some little aspect of it and think that's the most important part.
Exactly, but also these guys aren't even going to the gym yet, right?
They're just taking creatine at 3 p.m. before the meal, but they're not going to the gym.
Exactly, and it's like, listen, maybe maybe at some super elite level of performance, it makes a difference when you take your creatine, maybe. But first, you have to actually go to the gym, right? And so it's the same for me. It's like someone who hasn't even, their longest no-fap streak is like 5 days, and they're talking about semen retention. It's like, bro, chill. Like, focus on porn first. Get that out of your life. And then maybe at some point later, let's get to that.
Yeah. I like that you're bringing in basically the topic of understanding, okay, what's the most important things to be focusing on first? Because there's a lot in this sphere that you could do. You could do semen retention. You can optimize your sleep. You can eat better. You can exercise. And it's thinking, okay, what do I focus on first? And it sounds like getting rid of porn, dealing with the underlying shame that's there, and cultivating awareness are kind of the 3 big ones.
Yeah.
And maybe exercise it.
Totally, yeah. That's where I would start. And also one more thing I want to say about this is that, look, different things work for different people, right? Ultimately, what I'm putting forth a model for how to overcome this and how to use it as a catalyst to improve your life that is different from other models. And maybe you try this and it's great, wonderful. Maybe you try this and you're like, no, I'm going to do the other thing. I'm going to do the no-fap thing. That's fine. Like, I just want you to find something that works for you, right?
Yeah. But it also feels fairly universal in the sense of it's hard to imagine a model that would work if it doesn't include some aspect of healing the underlying shame.
I think that's true, yeah. I think that's true. I mean, again, like the alternative is basically like white knuckling it, right? Yeah. It's like just holding on
and
for dear life.
repressing and thinking that your sex is bad.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would want to say to somebody who's starting out on this journey?
Yeah, no, I think we've covered the most important things. Like I said, anyone who is starting on this journey, I would just say, listen, you're doing the right thing and you're in the right place, and just keep going and don't get discouraged. Listen, in my life, let me put it this way, right? Like I was saying, the moment I decided to quit porn, because of the work I'd already done, I just quit and that was it. But that is not the story of my life. Everything that I've accomplished in my life, I first failed at like a dozen times, right? And in fact, I think that's one of my strengths is my ability to endure failure and keep going. A lot of the things I've accomplished in life really are just because I just kept at it, far past the point where most people give up, right?
Yeah.
And that's, don't get discouraged if you try and fail and try and fail and then feel like, oh my God, I'm doing this wrong or I can't do this. No, just keep going. Just keep following this path.
It's almost like failure is a sign that you're on the right path.
Yeah. And just be more stubborn, right? Just be more stubborn than this habit of yours, and be more stubborn than the challenges that the world throws at you, So yeah, I think if you're already here, you're already listening to something like this, just keep going, man. 5 years from now, your life is going to be so different. So yeah, just one foot in front of the other.
Well, it's been an honor to interview you on this podcast, the first guest interview, which I'm super excited about. And I know people are going to love the insights from this episode. So
thanks for having me.
I guess the last thing is, where can people find out about your materials, your content, everything?
So My thing is called QuitByHealing. It's all one word, QuitByHealing. And you can find me on YouTube. That's probably the best place to go, right? YouTube, just at QuitByHealing. You can also find me on TikTok, but nature of the platform is most of the stuff there is kind of silly. and yeah, basically, if you go to YouTube, you can also then find the link to my Discord there. And that's where, if you want to dive deeper into this and if you want to learn the method, essentially, all the details of the method that I have put together for quitting porn, if you just search for QuitByHealing, that should take you there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure and looking forward to the next conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.